values tend to cluster. They're in a system. They're organized on some level. And there are two clusters that seem to be really important for solving social and environmental issues. The first cluster are intrinsic values, what we call intrinsic values. And those are values that are sort of inherently rewarding to pursue. So they're things like affiliation to friends and family, connection with nature, self-acceptance, creativity, freedom. They're things that sort of ends in themselves. And there is a second set of values, a cluster of values, which are extrinsic values. So those are ones that are centered on external approval or reward. So they're things like financial success, wealth, power, authority, image, status, those sorts of things. And the most important thing when you look at the research is that those two clusters are in tension. So you tend to fall down on one or the other. You tend to prioritize one over the other. Doesn't mean you don't value those other things. You do. It's just you tend to promote one more than the other. And when you look at those values that are in tension, you find that the intrinsic values are overwhelmingly associated with pro-social and pro-environmental behavior and attitudes. So people who are trying to solve big social and environmental problems that we face tend to prioritize those intrinsic values. And from the research as well, we know that those extrinsic values are overwhelmingly associated with sort of antisocial and anti-environmental behaviors. And so what does that mean for what we do? Well, the first thing is that these insights are not new in some ways. A lot of people feel this stuff already and know it in different ways. And a lot of the things that civil society or NGOs or government departments, some of the things they do are already in line with that. So some of the things they promote help to strengthen those intrinsic values. But when you look through the values lens, you see that there are some other things that we do that maybe don't do that push in different directions. When we say appeal to people to solve climate change because it's fashionable, because it's cool to do climate change, you're at the same time strengthening those extrinsic values. Or say when you're arguing that we should support disabled people in working in the economy because it strengthens the economy, not because they have rights and they're people, then at the same time you're sort of implying that these economic arguments are the only thing that we should consider and potentially strengthening those extrinsic values. So some of our practices where we do those things, we probably need to change. And people who do them, what they argue is that, well, we're appealing to these values because we want to push people into this other place. And they're successful, some of those projects that do those things. But the problem is we don't measure lots of the other things that happen when you do that. And we know from the research that there's a lot of collateral damage. When you're measuring only very narrowly, you might succeed in making someone travel on a bus or wear a jumper to solve climate change because it's cool, but you don't measure lots of other things within climate change and even broader than that. And what we find, it seems in the research, is that it makes it harder to change those things when you try and use the extrinsic values to solve those social and environmental issues. So the intrinsic values, they're much more durable, they last longer, and they seem to motivate people more in line with solving some of the big problems that our society faces. So we're here today to just explore that, think about how it applies to what everyone, all the different organisations that are here and people that are here, how they might sort of make it part of what they do. And that's what is going on in many different countries now across Europe and beyond.
May I put your question? I think it's very interesting what you tell me, so I'm very happy. Are you happy?
Yeah.
But I'm just asking one question, if you can just help me. How difficult is it to change it if you have like a preference for one of the systems to change to the other? So without my question, just tell me.
Yeah, no. So in terms of changing values, well, we know that our values are shaped by our sort of our lived experience, the sum total of our culture, our society, and our interactions with it. And we're very likely to have similar values to our family, but we know that there are also generational shifts, which reinforces this idea that it is about culture and our society and what it values and what it, through the policies and institutions and places that it values, what it tells us is good to value. It's not easy necessarily to change values, but what you see is that it's quite profound, it's quite significant change. We know that there are big shifts in values at certain crisis points, and that you can see those historically. We also know that values temporarily change very quickly. So we know that we're constantly engaging with each other's values when we talk to each other, where we create experiences and places, and that will temporarily increase the importance of certain values. So we can even people who value those extrinsic values more, they hold the intrinsic values to be important still, just not as important. And the challenge is to find creative ways to engage those values. And I'll be showing some research today about how you can make people think about those things and make it more important for them. Only temporarily in some situations, but there are ways in which you can try and make that much more long term. And that's that's the challenge that we face, I suppose, is how you create that shift.